The instinct is immediate. Let's do something. Got to get it out. But what if the right move is to wait? Today, we're talking about active surveillance, living with prostate cancer without immediate treatment. Now, it may sound risky, but for some men, it's the smartest decision they'll ever make. And we're going to talk to about the courage to wait with our guests coming up in just a couple of seconds. So stay with us. Welcome back. I'm Reggie Hicks, your host, and welcome to everyone watching on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn Live, and to those listening on your favorite podcast platforms. We appreciate you being a part of our evening and our show today. Please remember, as always, to like, share, subscribe, and always engage. Now, our guest this evening is Roy S. Johnson, and he's a Pulitzer Prize finalist and commentary and a member of the National Association of Black Journalists Hall of Fame. So we got a Hall of Famer with us today. He's a columnist for the award-winning AL.com, where he writes about the issues, people, and policies shaping communities across Alabama and beyond. Now, Roy is a veteran journalist who has worked with Sports Illustrated, the New York Times, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC. And he's also an Edward R. Murrow Award winner for the national podcast Unjustifiable. So today, he's using his voice in a different way, sharing his personal journey with prostate cancer and helping others make informed decisions. So without further ado, hey Roy, how you doing, man? Good to see you.
I'm doing great, brother. How you doing, sir?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful and so happy to get you on. I know this has been a busy time for you, and we've kind of worked out our schedules, and here we are. So I'm really glad and excited to hear your story. Um, First of all, I want to thank you for being an advocate because not many men who go through this are willing to kind of put everything out there, your feelings, your fears, your hope, and you have done that throughout your journey. And I know there's a lot to unpack around your story, so we're going to take it step by step. And what I'd like to do first off is start with your talking about your family history. I read something a little bit about what you shared in one of your columns, and unfortunately, your story is not unique, particularly when it comes to communities of color. So, you talked about your father passing, I think you were 11, is that right?
That is correct.
So, tell me about how he passed, how you found out what was going on as far as the family history and prostate cancer.
Well, sure, Reggie. And if you don't mind, I'd like to give a little context to the man. Roy Johnson was his name. He did not have a middle initial, so I'm not a junior. But Roy was a pretty unique person. First
Mhm.
of all, he was a survivor of the Tulsa Race Massacre. I'm not sure if you mentioned I grew up in
Oh, wow.
Tulsa, Oklahoma. He also had a store on Black Wall Street.
Mm,
And because he died so early in my life, I didn't know much about him as a man. I certainly knew him as a father, as a church going man. We grew up attending Vernon AME Church, which was the only structure that survived the race massacre in 1921. So my family has always been in the church, and I'm grateful for that. What I learned later on, as I was asking some folks who knew my dad about him, one of them said, "Well, you know, your dad ran the numbers, right?" I'm like, "Excuse me, what? Dad ran the numbers?" I said, "Dad was a gangster."
Oh,
So
wow.
Roy had a pretty unique life that I didn't know about at the time. And as I mentioned, he died. And what I remember about that period is that for the last couple of years of his life, he spent a lot of time in the hospital, which meant we spent a lot of time at the hospital. But back then in the 60s, they did not allow children
Yeah.
up into the hospital rooms. So my brother and I would either be uh, waiting in the lobby with one of our family members as my mom was upstairs, or we'd be at someone's house while she was going to visit him at the hospital.
Hmm.
I do remember the 1969 Super Bowl where the Jets beat the Colts. We were able to go up and watch the game in the room. Looking back, that must have been an indication that he was very, very sick for them to actually allow us up into the hotel room. So we
Right.
had Thanksgiving dinner the year before, Christmas dinner, and then watched that Super Bowl in his hospital room before he died soon thereafter. Now, of course, they didn't tell us anything about how he died, or if they did, I don't remember. I was
Right.
11 years
Right.
old, but I'm sure they
And they
didn't
probably
tell
didn't.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
wasn't until much, much later in life. I was grown, I was married, and I did manage to just keep some things
Hmm.
that my parents had, just as papers. And I was going through papers one day, and I found his death certificate, and that is where I saw cause of death, prostate cancer. And I was like,
Wow.
wow, okay. So I did not learn that, and probably I was probably in my 30s or 40s at the time. I'm grateful that because he died early, probably, I began going to the doctor at a young age every year. So I've
Hmm.
been a faithful annual checkup guy, annual
Hmm.
checkup brother for as long as I can remember. And I also faithfully got that prostate cancer test, the one that most brothers don't want to
PSA.
get, right?
Yeah. And the
You know,
DRE.
that
Yeah.
digital
Yeah.
exam.
Right.
And as I look back and as I share with people now, if it's 15 to 20 seconds, if not even that, 15 seconds of embarrassment versus death, I'll take the 15 seconds, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I had that. And then, of course, later on, they developed the PSA test. And we'll talk about that. But in
Hmm.
terms of just family history, I didn't learn until I was an adult that he had died of prostate cancer.
So, how do you know how old was he when he passed away?
He was in his early 60s.
Hmm. Wow. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Did anybody else in your family? Was he an only child? Did he have brothers? Were there other people in your family that may have? Uh,
Yeah, so it's kind of a classic story of that generation. He was one of, I believe, 11 children. He
mm,
was among the oldest. They were scattered various places, and again, he didn't have kids until he was 50. So, my relatives were different generations to a degree. I had,
right.
cousins who were old enough to be my parents because he didn't have kids until late in life.
Later in life.
The
Yeah.
only brother that I knew was familiar with, the only one of his brothers, was Uncle James, Uncle Jimmy. And so he was a younger brother, but Uncle Jimmy lived a long, long life. And when he died, it was before I had learned that my own father had died of prostate cancer. So I don't have any sense of what the cause of death was for Uncle Jimmy. And you've
Uncle
given
Jimmy.
me an idea, of course, today with all the technology, I could probably find his death certificate online. So I should probably go and try to find that. But no, I don't have any sense of any relatives, any other relatives of his who had prostate cancer, although I'm almost absolutely 100% they did.
Hmm.
And then my mother was an only child. So
Okay.
there were no men on her side of the family as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. I had an Uncle Jimmy too. I think we all, not
I
Jimmy. We
think
all
we
have
all had
Uncle
Uncle
Jimmys.
Jimmy.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
It is it's difficult. I tell the story of my fraternity brother Ralph Franklin, who really is the impetus of this entire project, and how we went with him, and he had just been diagnosed, and he really wanted to talk to at his family reunion, and the older siblings, one in particular, would not let him address the group to talk about what he was going through, and to talk and to see if how prevalent it was in his family. And so he had to kind of talked to people on the side, and eventually found out that there were more than two or three that had been dealing with it, but everybody was silent. I mean, it was like, just taboo. You didn't talk about it. So I'm glad to see, folk like you, Roy, and others who are now coming out. My son, who's just will be turning 30 this year, he knows to kind of be on the lookout, and when he gets up to that age, to track his PSA. But I was reading about you, and you were actually involved in the Alabama American Cancer Society. You're on the board, right? In like 2019. So you had a connection with cancer and advocacy. How did you end up being a part of that? And this was before your diagnosis, right?
Sure, absolutely. Well, at that point, I knew that my father had died of prostate cancer. And so when I was
Okay.
approached by someone on the board about joining, I had a friend who was actually president of the board at the time. I said, absolutely. And I did it in honor of him.
Mm,
And that was, I believe, around 2017 when I first joined. I mean, who knew a few years later that I would be diagnosed myself. But there are a few members of the board who have their own cancer journeys and their
hmm
own stories to share.
hmm
But yeah, I joined in 2017 in honor of my dad.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was wondering about that connection. So let's kind of shift now. Let's talk about your story. Um, what led you to go down this path of going to a urologist, finding out what's going on? How did that come? How did that come about?
So as I mentioned, I have been getting annual checkups for as long as I can remember. And so you go through the routine, you get your tests,
Hmm.
all clear, see you next year. So it was around this time last year and I'd started going every 6 months. As I mentioned to you before we came on, I just turned 70 this year. So after I reached about 67 or 68, my doctor said, we really should make these every 6 months.
Oh wow.
So I started
Yeah.
going every 6 months, and I was already taking the PSA blood test at the time. So of course you go to the doctor, you get your results on the little app, and you look at them, and then you kind of blow them off. You don't even think about it.
Right. Right.
And so last year, I went through the whole routine again, got the blood tests, all the different tests for the various things, and then you get that call. You get a call from the doctor's office, which was very unusual. And I'd been around long enough to know that when you get a call from the doctor's office, it's typically not a good thing.
Right. Right.
And it was
Yeah.
from one of the attendants at the office. It wasn't from my doctor, and she essentially said that my PSA test was had sort of given them a red flag. There was a little bit of a spike, and so they wanted me to go to a urologist. And so that began that journey to go to a urologist. And first thing first was to get that blood test
Hmm.
confirmed.
Hmm.
So the urologists took their own test. And we sat down and just really the early stages, trying not to panic, trying not to get too far ahead of myself. I pride myself on trying to live in the present,
Hmm.
and it certainly gets challenged when you're facing potentially facing something like cancer.
Right.
But we had our first appointment, had a conversation, had the two tests once again, and then began, uh, which is probably the worst part of all of this, was the waiting. Uh,
Yeah, I was going to ask you,
waiting
but yeah.
to Yeah, so I got the PSA test and had to wait for the result for it to be confirmed, and it was confirmed. And my numbers, I shared them in my columns. I've written what I call my cancer chronicles, and if you Google Roy S. Johnson and the Cancer Chronicles, you'll find all of the columns I've written on it.
Hmm.
My PSA was steady around 3.5
Hmm.
for most of the years, and for someone my age, that was pretty normal,
Right.
and so
Right.
it didn't raise any red flags. And then it had spiked up to 4, And when I went to the urologist, he said, well, 4 is not atypical for someone 70, but at the time I was 69.
Right.
So they said, well, we can't give you that grace because you're not yet 70. So let's continue to find out where we are. And so his test confirmed it, came back 4.2, 4.3. And
So
so he
it
said, well, now let's have
a biopsy.
it then have the biopsy. So of
Right.
course
Right.
that triggered another several weeks of waiting for an appointment because I wanted the biopsy the next day. It's like, can we go do this now?
Let's do it now. Right.
So let's do it now. So we finally, after a couple of weeks, had the biopsy. And then what do you have to do again? Wait. You have
Wait.
to wait for the results.
Yes.
And so this was late May of last year. And on 4th of July weekend, my wife and I were in New Orleans during the Essence Festival.
Hmm.
And on July 2nd, my wife is the CEO and founder of the Black Women's Mental Health Institute. And so she was hosting an event in New Orleans that evening. We all knew that we were waiting for the doctor's call, but we didn't know when that was going to happen.
Right.
And this
Right.
was the Friday of 4th of July weekend, right? You
Hmm.
really don't expect the call then.
Right.
So as I was helping her set up and people were starting to come in for the event, the phone rang and I looked at it and it was his number. And I said, okay.
Oh.
So I
Okay.
stepped outside to take the call. Now, fortunately, Reggie, I have two phones, fortunately or unfortunately. Sometimes it drives me crazy,
Right.
but maybe it was instinct, maybe it was God, but I picked up my other phone. First of all, I picked up the phone, it was the doctor. I put him on speaker and I picked up my other phone and started to record. Something told me to record.
Mm.
And I'm glad I did it because he was very early on. He said, unfortunately. And as soon as you hear that word, unfortunately, your
Right.
brain kicks into another mode.
Right.
And had I not recorded it, I don't know if I would have remembered what the
Yeah.
doctor told me,
Yeah.
other than the unfortunately, we found cancer. And so we had a conversation. He mentioned that he wanted to see me again soon. But of course, I wanted to come in that next week, and
Hmm.
we couldn't do that. But then I had to figure out how I was going to tell my wife and when. And I decided to wait. I didn't want to interrupt her event that she was hosting and was
Hmm.
pretty much the
Right.
center of attention. So I let that transpire. And later that evening, we went out with some friends after her event. And so let that pass. We finally got back to our Airbnb. And I told her that the doctor called because I hadn't even told her that the doctor called.
It called. Right.
Told her
Right.
that the doctor called and what he had said. And Reggie, if the cancer wasn't going to kill me, she might have right then because she said, "Why didn't you
Why'd
tell
you
me?
tell me? Right. Yeah.
Why did you tell me?" So I said because I didn't want to interrupt your event, but she understood eventually. And of course, we had an emotional night as we talked about that. But I'll always remember where I was. Just as anybody who's been diagnosed with cancer will probably remember where they were when they
Yeah.
heard the word cancer and their name in the same sentence.
Yeah. And I always tell the story that for me, I was in a exam room and with the urologist when he came in, and we filmed it. So he actually had it in one of our openings, and the little piece where he says, you have prostate cancer. But my wife was there. But interestingly enough, I saw him with a big old bundle of information under his arm. So I knew then that that meant he had all of the different treatment options and information. Normally, if it's a normal PSA, and he didn't call me in to tell me, it was just the kind of like the reveal, right? It's like it could be, it could be fine. But when I saw that, I had about 10 seconds or so to kind of get prepared. And to your point, it's a good thing I had it on tape because for me, once he said that, I tell people it's like the teacher in the Peanuts cartoon where all he goes blah blah blah, but that's all I heard blah 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 blah.
Wow, 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 wow,
Yeah,
wow.
right. I was like, I could not tell you. I didn't really know. I didn't process it until I went back and I was able to watch it, and I was like, "Oh wow!" I could see that my wife was visibly upset, and I didn't remember a whole lot of what happened in the room. But to your point, you do remember the when, the time, maybe what happened prior. The good thing is that you didn't find out in your my chart portal, which you know, sometimes they have things in that, and you see certain things and you go, okay, what does that mean? But it's a good thing that your doc said, here's what we found. Did do you remember what your Gleason score was, or any that
It was
information?
7.
7. Yeah.
So the appointment is when this was a couple of weeks later. Again, more waiting.
Hmm.
The appointment was when my wife and I received all that packet of information
Right.
that you talked about, as well as the details of the biopsy. They took 12 samples,
Hmm.
found cancer in 6 of them. Uh, all but one of them were stage one was stage two. And what the doctor said was if one of them is stage two, they always go with the higher
Right.
stage. So
Right.
technically, my diagnosis was stage two prostate cancer with a Gleason score of 7.
And what did you talked about what you heard maybe and didn't hear. Um, what were your first assumptions, or did you have any fears that come to mind when you heard that? I mean, did you kind of fast forward? But you say you're kind of a person that deals with things as they are in real time. But did you fast forward to what does that mean? What do I do? Any of that when you first heard it?
Well, I think
Did you?
my fears, I'm human like
Yeah.
everyone else,
Hmm.
and the fearful part came in when I learned that I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. Because when you hear that, you automatically think the end, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
you you think, okay,
Yeah.
this is it,
Yep.
and that made me sad. Right, I had just gotten married. We're about to have our third anniversary, so we had not been married 2 years yet. I have two children, ages 31 and 28, and love them to death, and they live in other parts of the country.
Hmm.
Obviously, with my father who died, and he died at 67, so I was older than him already, but it was around the same age. So there was a reality check that I had to give myself, but it didn't prevent me from being sad, from going through the natural range of emotions,
Right.
while at the same time trying to stay strong for the people around me, the people who
Hmm.
loved and cared about me.
Hmm. So now you're processing this. You're kind of going through it, like we all do, and now you're maybe turning that corner to how can I share this information? And then being a journalist, I mean, you're in a great position to do that. How did you decide to share your story doing your chronicles, the Cancer Chronicles? How did you the series? When did you kind of make that decision? This is something that I have to tell people.
Well, let me give you a prologue to that because uh, we're sitting in the office for this first meeting and going over the list of treatment options. They actually gave us a folder as we were sitting in the lobby waiting to meet with the urologist. My wife and I pulled out the list and got through, saw surgery, saw
Hmm.
chemo, and each one had an explanation. And
Hmm.
then we got to active surveillance. And we both said, "Oh hell no, we're gonna do it." And we took a pen and we scratched it out. We're not doing that. And then we went on to the other treatments. And so we went into the office, and the great thing was our urologist is also a man of faith,
Hmm.
and so that was comforting. My daughter was on FaceTime. My son was working, so he wasn't able to be on. So she's in California. She was on FaceTime, and he kind of walked us through all of the options,
Hmm.
and basically shared the side effects of
Right.
each. But the thing that he shared mostly was just relax. uh, that this is a slow moving cancer. And he said 97% of the people survive with it. He said you're more likely to die with prostate cancer than from prostate cancer.
Mhm.
Reggie, 97%. I take that to Vegas, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
right, right.
that's a
Freaking
good
out.
number.
Yeah, yeah,
I could work with those
yeah.
odds, 97%. And that's because more and more people are catching it early. So it eased my immediate fears a bit when I learned about that. And I was like, okay, so what do I have to do to make sure that I'm in that 97%? He didn't have me make any decisions about treatment at that point, told me to go home and we could talk about him and pray over him and get back to him. And our initial decision was to have surgery.
Mhm.
And so, getting to your question about what made me decide to write about it, I was never not going to write about it, Reggie. I mean, I am a journalist who has spent much of my career asking people to share their
The
deepest
stories.
secrets, their
Right,
fears, the things that move them. How could I do that and then not do it myself? You know, that
right.
would have been hypocritical of me. So I was never not going to write about it. You know, as I wrote the first one, and in it I actually shared that my wife and I decided to have the surgery, and I was sharing it with a few people that I know would have been upset if they had read it online before they heard from me.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I made a few calls, and only
yeah.
one of them asked, "Why are you doing this?" And it made me stop and answer her. And it didn't take long. I said, because if one man read it and decided to go get their PSA check for the first time, then that was enough for me.
Mhm.
Let alone if one man got their PSA checked and it saved their life,
Mhm.
right? So,
Right.
so for me, I also relied on scripture, you know, and I had a couple of them that I relied on. One of them was Second Chronicles 12:9, which says, "My grace is sufficient,
Efficient. Mhm.
and that His power is made perfect in our weakness." But it's the second part of that quote that really drew me, and I'm reading it because I want to get it right. It says, "Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so Christ's power may rest on me." So this was Paul saying, "Look, I'm gonna
Pause.
talk about
Right,
it.
right,
I'm gonna boast about it." So
right.
when you believe that, when you embrace that, when you wrap yourself in that, how could I not boast about my infirmity, using the platform that He gave me, where we reach over a million eyeballs a day, where I have a national following. Uh, that was the purpose in this, to be able to utilize this platform not just for my good but for the good of someone who might come across it and make a decision that could change their lives.
Yeah, and I think that, it's admirable that you're doing what you're doing because, with all of us, I'm doing the podcast and outreach and a lot of that was seeing my fraternity brother, Ralph Franklin grow. He opened up and he said, I want people to know what I'm going through, but with a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. I mean, when he found out, his PSA was 100. So
Mm,
you can
mm.
understand that he had an uphill battle, but he was willing to share that message. And so this is all a part of his legacy. And then 2 years into kind of following him around and documenting his journey, I was, diagnosed and I had to, kind of carry this thing um, through because to your point, if it's one person and I've known, a couple of folk that have said to me, had it not been for you sharing your story, I would not have thought about any, the PSA or what it meant or what I needed to do to keep track of it or find my family history. I had a cousin of mine, and her husband was never. He was pretty stubborn, but she made him go. And because we are linked, right, by blood, it's like it could be in the family. It's in the family, and come to find out that he did have prostate cancer and got it treated. And I'm not saying that to brag or anything. It's just that everybody can do a little something, I think. to help get this message out. And to your point, interestingly enough, I went to research, because I was diagnosed years ago, right? 12 years ago. And you said that for you, active surveillance, you were like, oh, I'm scratching that one out. And then I realized in my research that active surveillance is really like now the number one treatment option for men with particularly slow growing, prostate cancer. I guess in a sense I did too, because my first inclination was to do something, and things happen. And again, you talk about faith, and I really think, the Lord has his hands in guiding me through this process to where I literally waited almost a year while I went out to, chronicle all the different treatment options that were available to me, and to add that into what I was doing. And eventually I ended up having surgery. But again, it seems to me your faith played a really strong role in your being able to, uh, you know, say, this active surveillance thing I'm going to do. Um, how was it explained to you? Um, when you said, did you tell your doctor, I think I'm gonna kind of wait this thing out, and let's see, let's monitor it and see what happens?
Well, first, Reggie, I want to say don't ever again apologize for boasting about your journey, because every time you talk about it, it may save someone's life. Like you, I'm humbled when men I don't know walk up to me and say, "Because of you, I've gotten a test," or "Because of you,
Right.
I'm getting my father is getting a test." That happens almost every time I go into any crowd, whether it's at church on Sunday, whether it is at a convention. When I recently returned from the Black Alumni Summit at
Hmm.
Stanford, something we do every 2 years,
Hmm.
at least 5 or 6 brothers, some of whom I did not know, came up to me and said, "Thank you. I've been reading your stuff. How are you?" And I got mine tested. Women came up to me and said,
Wow.
"Yeah, my husband got tested because of what you wrote." People I did not know were even reading my column. So, yeah, don't ever apologize for that, because every time you do this, you're likely moving someone in the direction of saving their lives. And particularly among us, and I'm sure you say it every show, we know that
Yeah.
1 in 8 men will get prostate cancer, but 1 in 6 of us. Reggie, I believe that's a number we can change, if nothing else, because we can get more and more men to get tested and get tested early. I think that
Right.
there's no reason for us to die at a higher rate other than the fact that we discover it later,
Yeah.
because we tend to not go to the doctor. So if we can get our young men as early as 40 now to
Hmm.
begin to get that PSA test, so they have a baseline from which to work, we can certainly save lives over the next 10 or 20 years. And so let's talk about my process of getting towards active surveillance. I have a couple of friends. Of course, when you go through something like this, you always want more than one opinion. As much as I respected my urologist, I shared with him that I wanted to speak with others as
Right.
well, and
Yeah.
one of whom happened to be a longtime friend who was a urologist in New York. So I shared with him what was going on, and at that point, he shared with me. Now I have not seen him in 12 years or so. We'd stayed in touch via text, but he shared with me that he had been diagnosed with prostate cancer 8 years before, and had the surgery and was fine. So to allay my fears, he shared that with me. So I shared my tests with him and sent everything to him. And then there was another urologist that someone else recommended who said, "Why don't you loop him in as well, as an African American doctor here, Dr. Michael Bivens?" And so I had 3 men looking at my tests. I also had a genetic test to determine how aggressive my cancer might be, and it
Hmm.
turned out to be in the low range. And so it was Dr. Bivens who said, "Well, if you were my patient, you'd be a strong candidate for active surveillance." And that was the first time I was like, "Really?
Right.
Why?"
Yeah.
And he began to explain to me essentially that you can always have surgery, right? We're gonna monitor this. Active surveillance is a test every 6 months. If there's a spike, you can have surgery or you can have cancer. You can choose another more aggressive treatment. But for now, there's no reason to do so. And I began to think about it. And what's ironic is that my go-to scripture has always been Isaiah 40:31, and it's the one I wear around my neck. And what does it say? Those who wait, right?
Mm, right.
Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength.
Strength.
And
Yeah.
so here I was rushing into something without embracing the scripture that was hanging around my neck. And once I began to put those two things together, God and I had some conversations because one of the challenges early on, is just understanding that I have cancer in my body right now.
Mm-hmm.
I call it like that unwelcome relative that just shows up and won't leave
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and is always annoying. They're using your phone, eating your food,
Right.
drinking your liquor, all that stuff, right? And
Yep.
because I'd be at the gym trying to lift the bar, and all of a sudden my brain would go, "Damn, we have cancer," and I'm like, "Stop! I don't want
Yeah.
to think about this all the time." And it
Right.
over time that dissipated to the point where now I don't even think about having cancer until someone walks up with that face. They go, "Oh, how you doing?" And I go, "Oh,
Right.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
oh well, I'm doing fine,"
Yeah.
because, as you know, there's really no symptoms for prostate cancer. I don't feel any different today than I did a year ago. My knees hurt, my back hurts, but that's more of a function of just hanging around
Age.
long enough than
Right.
the prostate than
Right.
prostate cancer. So once my wife and I prayed on it, mostly me because she was still skeptical. I listened to Dr. Bivens. I shared that with the other doctors, and they concurred that I was a good candidate for active surveillance. And so we decided to pursue that. And once I told my urologist, he said, "Okay, I'll see you in 6 months." And so at that point, I had to begin the process of learning to live with cancer. And one of the things I wrote about in one of my columns was you often hear people either have cancer or they're a survivor. And I said there's got to be something in between. And myself and some other people in this space devised the term thriver. So I'm
Thriver.
a, I'm a
Yeah.
I'm thriving with cancer, right? So I'm doing well, no symptoms, and so rather than be bogged down and laden and burdened by the fact that I have this disease in me, I'm looking at it through another lens, and that is the lens of healing, the lens of health. And so I'm thriving with cancer. I may not be a survivor in the traditional sense, but I don't consider myself as having it in the most debilitating sense as well. So
Right.
once I made that decision, and you mentioned it earlier, I did some research. There was a story in the New York Times that said right now, 67% of men diagnosed with prostate cancer choose active
Yep.
surveillance. I was like, wow. So forget that I'm not alone. That's a big
That's a big
fraternity of
number,
folks.
right? That's
That's a
right.
big
Yeah.
number, and it's because people are detecting it earlier. As I've learned by being on the board of the American Cancer Society, if you live long enough, there may be a cure, right? I mean,
Yes.
so the treatments are much more advanced today than they were 10 years ago, doubly so than they were 20 years ago, and they're getting better every day. People are living longer. They are being cured at higher rates. And so for me, active surveillance is the path. I'm good with it. And as long as, every day I wake up and thank God for another opportunity to have a chance and a choice to do what he's called me to do.
Yeah. And seems to me that's how through your faith is that how you manage? I'm sure there's a little bit of anxiety between checkups, tests. Is it every 6 months or 3 months now?
So I've had two, if I had two, I think I've had two 6 month tests. Let me think. Let me do my math, right? So I think it was in August. So it was in
Mhm.
August when I finally told my doctor that I wanted to do active surveillance. All right. So that was August. So 6 months later was February
Mhm.
when I had my first test. And so, yeah, I mean, there's anxiety as you wait,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'm used to that waiting at this point, and I'm comfortable with whatever transpires. I know that I'm in his hands, and I know that I have thousands of people who are praying for me, and I certainly believe in the power of
Prayer.
prayer.
Absolutely.
And so and when I didn't get a well, I see. Did I get a call? I did get that with my chart thing, which of course you can drive yourself crazy
Yeah.
digging, yep,
Oh,
trying to find your
right.
number.
Right. Right.
And so where I'll say is before I went to my urologist, I had my checkup with my primary physician, and he wanted to take a PSA test. And when his came through on my chart, it was down to 3.5. I was like, wait a minute,
Hmm.
how did my PSA went down?
Down.
I'm
Yeah.
like, okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay,
I'll
God,
take
we're
that.
doing
That's
it
right.
here.
Right.
And then I had the 6 month test with my urologist, and it basically confirmed it. It was down to like 3.2, something like that. And you pick up the phone if it's the nurse on the other end, it's probably good news,
It's
right?
good news, right? Yeah. That's right.
I was in
Yeah.
the middle of a meeting. I saw it was the number and I picked it up. She said, Mr. Johnson, I said, yes, says, good news. Your PSA is down to 3.2. We'll see you in 6 months. So that was in February. Uh, when I go this time, I will probably get another biopsy. He says he wants to do a biopsy every
Mhm.
year just to get a deeper understanding of what's going on. So, but no, I'm in a good mind space. I'm thriving with it. I'm excited about having the opportunity to talk about it and share it. Just came back from Napa Valley, was with a longtime friend who told me of her experience with cancer. It was a very unique cancer. And I'll probably write about that. I mean, so now everybody wants to share their
Share the story. That's
story
great.
story with me, and I'm perfectly fine with that.
So, what would you say to a brother who hears cancer and immediately thinks, "I got to get it out of me now"? Because I went through that. You went through. I think we all kind of go through that until we take a breath and pray and sort of then kind of look around and go, "Okay, all right, let's. What's next?" So, what would you say based on what you
Sure,
had to go through?
do your research. Uh, there's a lot of terms that get thrown at you, Gleason scores, etc. So take a minute to the extent that you can, understand where you are and what's going on inside your body. Ask for a genetic test. If necessary, ask for an MRI to get a
Hmm.
deeper look. And of course, depends on what your score is. Your brother who had 100, he probably may not have had active surveillance as an option
No,
at that
right,
point.
right,
Yeah. So if you're score, again, I was at 4. So if you're at that range, then it's something to think about. And at the time, again, I did not know about the 97%. First of all, that's tell them 97% survival rate.
right. Yeah.
Then tell them that 67% of men now are choosing active surveillance. The most difficult part of that is psychological, is learning to live with cancer and knowing that cancer is in your body. But
Hmm.
if you don't have to have surgery and go through that recovery, if you don't have to have chemotherapy and go endure that for several weeks, why do it now? And as my doctor said, you can always do it later. Of course, there's a risk. There's a risk that it could spread. That's a risk and a conversation that my God and I had, my wife and I had, that we were acceptable. We were okay with living with that level of risk based on the information I had, based on the conversations I've had with my doctors, and just what I'm hearing from God is just continue to wait, and He will renew my strength. So I would
Yeah.
just tell them to rely on their research, their doctors, their faith at whatever level it is, those people who love them, and make the best decision for them. It might be surgery, it might be chemo, but don't dismiss active surveillance without really
Right.
giving it a real opportunity to come to fruition.
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, what's out there now for as far as really surveilling this with the PSMA test, where they used to have to do a full bone scan. You don't have to really do that anymore. You can take this test and they put the stuff in your arm, and you go into the MRI, and they can kind of see if there's any PSA anywhere in your body. Um, and the other one is the what they're calling the manogram now, not the mammogram, but the manogram, which is
Right.
the use of the MRI to really take a close look at what's going on. Which 10 years ago you didn't really have that available to you as well. If you had to sum up your journey in one sentence, what would it be? And this is, I know it's hard for a journalist, but that's why I'm asking you this question because you are a journalist.
My pastor recently has been preaching on something he called uh, forced. Is it forced interruption? Forced interruption, and it's an event or something that causes you to pause and takes you to a level that you could not have gotten on your own, right?
Hmm.
There's a forced interrupter. So
Hmm.
it's an event, a decision, or an action that forces you to become closer to what God calls you to be.
Hmm.
So I would say that for me, cancer has been a forced interruption that has forced me to be more vocal about my faith, to utilize it for my own comfort as well as for the illumination of others. And we didn't talk about this, but in the midst of my journey, I began to advocate for an Alabama state law
Oh, I was getting
that
to that. Yeah, I was
had,
getting that
yeah,
was that was
had
gonna
not
be that's
passed last year
yeah.
that made would have made cancer screenings free for at high risk men, and that's men over 50 and any African American man. It didn't pass last year, and I started advocating for it. I
Let's
reached
talk
out
about
to the
SB 19. That's is that the
right,
yes, let's talk
right,
about that.
SB 19.
Mhm.
So SB 19 was sponsored by a white Republican in the Senate and an African American Democrat co-sponsor in the House. And I reached out to both of them and I said, "Well, what happened last year? Why didn't this go through?" Neither one of them had a strong answer, except that last year, of course, was the first year of the Trump administration,
Mhm.
and everything was going
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
And the bill had a clause that said African American men because African American men are more high
Right.
risk.
Mhm.
And because of that, at least that's my view, is that because of that, it kind of died. They just didn't touch it. Uh, but my assertion is that cancer is bipartisan. It shows no quarter. It doesn't matter whether you are
That's right.
rural or urban. Uh,
Rich
and
or
if there's
poor.
one thing
Right. Yeah.
rich or poor. And it said if there's an opportunity for all sides to come together and do something for people that might save lives, this was it. And so I wrote that. I stayed in touch with the two gentlemen, the two lawmakers. They dropped the bill early in the session. It went through all of the various committees.
Right.
Interestingly, one of the other lawmakers, a female, was diagnosed with breast cancer prior to the session. And so she crafted a bill with the exact same language as the prostate cancer bill to do the same for certain tests for breast cancer. And so these two bills made their way through the House and Senate until they were passed by both first by the Senate and then by the
Mhm.
House. And so that was very gratifying. The fact that something that I was advocating for actually came to fruition. And then, of
There's
course,
another
I
part to
went down
this,
to
right?
my. I know there's the curtain call, as I call it. I went to Montgomery that day just to see the voting on the passage of the bill. And as I was there, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And I was waiting around. A couple of the lawmakers were sending me texts, were like, "Do you know what's going on?" And I'm like, "No." I said, "Well, somebody may try to name this bill after you. And I'm like, excuse me, what are you talking about? They said, look, the train has left the stations,
Right.
so
Whether you're on it or not,
I
right?
don't know what's going on. And I saw people running around the floor, scurrying around. And at one point, I left I was in the press area. I went to the bathroom and I got a text message from one of the lawmakers saying, "Where are you? you need to get back in here."
Right, right.
And so I went back to the session. And long story short, uh, passed the bill unanimously.
Roy, I want to thank you not just for sharing your story, but for living it out loud. We appreciate your voice, your advocacy, and the impact you're making from your writing to your work around SB 19. Thank you for being a true thriver. Now, don't forget to check out Roy's Cancer Chronicles on al.com. That's al.com, and his newsletter as well. And we'll post all of that info in our show notes. If this conversation has helped you, please like and share it and subscribe so you're alerted to future episodes. Or you can always visit ifyouaremybrothers.org. That's ifyouaremybrothers.org to learn more about our documentary, of course, our podcast series, and our community engagement work. Thank you, Danny. You see there, ifyouaremybrothers.org. We also want to remind you that this project is a nonprofit 501c3 project of Straight Street Media, which is, by the way, dedicated to turning prostate cancer awareness into health action. Your support options are available. We can get Danny to put them on the screen right now, and also in the show notes if you want to make a small contribution, tax deductible, to help us in our efforts. We really appreciate it. There you have, thank you, Danny, all the different ways that you can make a contribution. You can even send us a check, and you have the P.O. box there to do that. Now, when you do make a contribution, you will receive your very own If You Are My Brothers commemorative mug. And we thank the folks over at Atlanta Brand Central for providing our brand new mugs. Yeah, they're still new, folks, and there they are right here. There it is, your very own. You get that for your contribution. Also, we want to give thanks to producer Danny, uh, Danny Garcia Pozo. Sorry, Danny, I always do that. And of course, Zach Reynolds at Borkhouse Productions for our brand new opening. Thank you for that, Zach. I want to remind you that this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice. Always talk to your healthcare provider. And one note before we leave, I've gotten a couple of folk to ask me about this particular pen. I use it on every episode. This was a gift from, I guess, she's our surrogate mother. Some people down in the South call you church mom. But she gave me this pen. I use it on every episode. And today, as we are recording, this is her 101 birthday. So, to Sister Napper, this show is dedicated to you. Thank you for your love, your support, for being there. Now, on that note, we will be joining you again in a couple of weeks. And we just want to remind you that if you are my brothers, please share this message. Remember to take care, to stay healthy, and keep the faith. Peace.